What is going on, YouTube people? Neocards and Comics here for a little bit of an intro to the actual real video. The people have been clamoring for comic book content, and today we have it. Special guest Swagglehos, Comics and Games, fellow content creator, friend of the channel, sat down with me for over an hour to discuss various topics, including the current state of the comic book market, how crazy and messy the ultra modern game is, and a bunch of stuff in between. And at the tail end of the conversation, a very interesting chat about cleaning, altering, trimming across cards, comics. You know, what can you do? What can't you do? How does the comic book community view this stuff versus the card community? Like I said, great conversation. If you're a comic book fan and you are not subscribed to his channel, you absolutely should be. I will try to remember to link it in the description down below. But without further ado, this is a long one. Goes for over an hour. Take it in chunks, listen to it as a podcast, whatever you got to do. But it is good quality content. We will catch you boys and girls on the next one. On to the interview. All right, we have a special guest today. I have not talked comic books for quite a while, and the commenters have been clamoring for it. So I figured if I was going to talk comic book markets, I had to find my cohort / fellow brother of the charts and graphs on the comic book side, and that is none other than Swagglehos himself. Welcome to the channel formally. I believe you've been on live streams, but I don't know if we've ever actually had like an official sit down on my channel. We have on yours, but
that's true. Actually, that's true. This is. I feel like this is the next big step of our relationship. You know, anyone can go on a live stream. Like that's easy. But if it's like, oh, pre-recorded video, that's like a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. So where can we'll do this off the top so it doesn't get lost in the weeds. Where can the folks find you on the various social spheres?
Sure, yeah. If you guys don't know, I have a YouTube channel called Swagglehos, which I think you can see probably in my little name right there. I'm sure if you put in the YouTube search, you'll find it. And I tend to do a few videos a week just talking about the comic book market and try to make it fun and entertaining. I also am on Instagram with Swagglehos as well. I think if you just search it, you'll find it, Swagglehos_comics. But yeah, those are kind of the main two platforms for me.
If I'm a good content creator, I'll try to remember to link that in the description down below. I always say that, and then I always forget to actually do it. But I will put the extra effort in this time around. So, yeah, I've been friends with Swagglehos for probably almost 2 years now. Probably, I think we got hooked up during the Marvel card boom. We exchanged some, commented on each other's videos, and then we're like, oh wait, we watch each other.
Totally.
Type situation.
Yeah, it's been good. I mean, it's weird. It's like, I feel like I've known you for a long time. We've never met in person, but hopefully we do at some point. I know before we started the stream, we were talking about trying to find a show where we will both find ourselves at. But yeah, no, it's good to always get a chance to talk to you, and especially if we get to talk about comics and things like that.
So part of the reason why I wanted to have you on is I'm kind of noticing similar things that you are. And for those that don't know, and I'll kind of let you run here for a minute and explain what you do. Swaggle has a comic book index that he created that charts a lot of the various ages of comics to give a macro level sense of the market. And his most recent video was about a week ago when your last market update, week and a half, maybe 2 weeks. Yeah. His intro was him laying on a floor, sucking up dust bunnies off the floor. And you didn't make the declarative statement, but you kind of hinted around maybe things are starting to get a little bit better. And from my side, I don't track prices quite as closely as you do, but I have my finger on the pulse. I've been kind of noticing the same things. So give the people a little bit of a background on the index itself so they could kind of understand what you do and kind of how you track that stuff. And then we'll kind of get into the weeds a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think, for us as content creators, we always want to be informed when we're talking about whatever prices and things like that. And there was a certain point, I'd say probably, I don't know, 6 or 7 months ago, maybe 8 months ago now at this time, where it just sort of dawned on me that there was no kind of buddy in the comic book space that was doing kind of like a 30,000 bird's eye view of like where the market is. Because at that time, prices were crashing and correcting and this and that. And I really just wanted to know, like, if there would be a way in some kind of index form to get like a good snapshot of where the values of comics are. So I just sort of decided on a whim to kind of put this index together and basically build it by taking the top 100 most in-demand books, which is like a series of things that I can pull from like Go Collect. Like if you guys, not to get in the weeds, but on the back end, they sort of have this list of like in the last 365 days, here's the most in-demand comics. So based it off of that, and then I kind of followed like which grades sell the most, have the highest volume, and kind of just pulled all the numbers together to kind of create an average of effectively, if you were going to buy these 100 books every month, like how much money would it cost you? And then allow that to sort of be the way we track the values for silver, bronze, and copper. And I basically been kind of updating it every single month for, you know, the last 8 months or so, and kind of reporting that data back to anyone who wants to hear about it. And yeah, in this last video that came out, I did a little bit about with me laying on the floor and kind of implying this idea that where we've seen the pullbacks and the corrections, it kind of feels like now we're feeling a little bit of resistance. You know, in any given month, it can kind of yo-yo up and down a little bit, but it does feel like those big drops that we were feeling, say, you know, 6 months ago, 4 months ago, even maybe even 3 months ago, the drop severity has curtailed, so to speak. So that's kind of where we are with things, or seemingly so.
Yeah, and I was kind of like we were talking pre-stream. I kind of noticed the same thing a little bit. Like I don't have an index or anything like that, but there's certain books that I kind of always keep an eye on, or like that you see. I follow a lot of the big IG sellers that are out there, and the ones that you see commonly posted. You know, ASM 50, a
Yeah.
129, a bunch of X-Men keys, like all that sort of stuff that transacts on a fairly regular basis. And when you're just kind of paying attention to that stuff, you notice like, boy, that 6.0 was like 1,500 like just 3 weeks ago, and now it's 1,200 and no one's even biting on it.
Yeah.
You kind of notice that stuff even if you're not like tracking it on a spreadsheet. And lately it seemed like just the vibe was that it did feel like things were getting a little bit more stable. And then when you look at, like, I like to use GPA, you go back and look at especially some of the stuff that got like overly inflated, like first appearance of Moon Knight, like Shang-Chi,
Yeah.
Morbius, like that sort of stuff. You look at those graphs and you see the huge spike. And then on the back end, it's like almost touching early 2020 pricing on some what would be considered pretty significant key books, like not
Yeah.
like your top shelf stuff, but pretty decent stuff. Where do you kind of, and one of the things that I really like about the index is that you have that trend line on there
Yeah.
that kind of shows like, hey, if the pandemic never happened, we'd be still kind of sitting here if you assume like a normal, I forget, what do you build in, 5 or 10% year over year?
Yeah. I think 8 to 15, I think, is now kind of the window that I suggest.
Yeah. So all of a sudden, when I see stuff like flirting with early 2020 pricing, that's pre-pandemic, I'm like, is this overcorrecting? Like, I know,
Yeah.
full disclosure, Swaggle and I, neither one of us have a crystal ball. Like, we're just people
Right.
that
Yeah.
like comic
Yeah.
books that happen to have nice microphones and happen to post content on the internet. And we have no idea if the world economy is just going to collapse 3 days after posting this video, which would change all this. But generally speaking, where do you think like that reset line is when it gets too early? Is that early 2020 number, like when stuff starts to touch what it sold for in like January, February, March of 2020? Are you immediately like, that's probably too cheap already because it kind of busted through your trend line?
Yeah, I think kind of what you were getting at is, in having built this index and then like looking back at the years, like you've kind of been able to see that like in the aggregate, it does feel like, okay, the values of these comics have grown at this sort of rate. So to that point, things got overinflated during COVID and the boom and stuff. And if you sort of lopped off all that inflated money, things have corrected back into this sort of trend line. And so I think, yes, like I do now look at certain books where if I see a book being sold at a 2020 price, or maybe even slightly above a 2020 price, and it's a book that I want, then could it go lower? Yeah, we don't have a crystal ball, like you said. Like could things, dip even further because in the macro economy, if things get harder for the rest of the year, then yeah, like there's going to be less demand because whatever, you have to pay bills and not comics. And so it could correct more, but if it's a comic book I want and I'm not like going ham on stuff, like that's sort of what I've been kind of saying to people is it feels like this is probably a good place to buy it in. And in fact, if anything, if it's in the 2020 range, you're probably getting a decent deal. Now, the problem with this is like some of the books you mentioned, like Special Marvel Edition 15, which is the first Shang-Chi, or like Moon Knight, some of those comics that I noticed, and I'm trying to now bake this into my understanding, is I think Marvel did major announcements for all of these Phase 4 characters, like Eternals and Shang-Chi and Moon Knight and She-Hulk and all this stuff in like 2018. So those books got like heavily inflated above their trend line.
Mm.
And then their trend line was starting at a place that was like organically or
A little overinflated, a little roided up to begin with. Had a
little roided up
injection in it. Yeah.
So then they got inflated and then they got pulled back after the correction. And so there is instances where you look at like Werewolf by Night 32, Moon Knight, and it's like selling at its 2020 price. And that one is like, in theory, it's like, this is a good opportunity to buy it. But I'm like, oh, but maybe this book actually is just got a hair too much inflated already. And maybe there's just a little bit more to go with it. But if it's like a ASM key, like, Amazing Spider-Man 1, and it's a 2020 price, that's a book that's like, well, yeah, if you want it, get it. So I think there is a little bit of, it depends on the book situation, but I would say in general, that's certainly been like, I think my approach. And as like in the card world and stuff, just because you can understand what a fair market price would be doesn't mean you can always find it at that price. So I also, to that point, say if you can find the 2020 price and it's there and you can see the opportunity, I mean, it might be a good thing to jump on.
Yeah. Did someone get one good rogue one-off deal because an eBay auction ended at 3 a.m. on a Sunday night?
Yeah.
That doesn't mean you're going to be able to walk into a con and, to the dealer and be like, hey, here's like the last recent comp. Can I get it for that minus 10% because I'm paying cash?
Yeah.
Like, they laugh out of the booth.
Yeah. The dealer will look at you and be like, well, you should have bought that one.
Yeah. Pretty much. One of the things that I know, and maybe this is just because I pay more attention to these because it's kind of more what I collect, so I follow the prices better. It does seem like ASM and X-Men specifically seem to be holding up better than it's tough to find a good ASM key at early 2020 prices. Like when you look at those GPA graphs, they've come down, but there's still a pretty good jump over early 2020 prices. Some X-Men keys have gotten back, like if you're talking like, I don't know if this has gotten all the way back, but like the first appearance of Jubilee, like more kind of like B and C level keys I think have kind of gotten closer to those numbers. But like an X-Men 101 has come down, but you're not getting like a steal price on it right now. Do you think that's just because of the properties or more because of the future MCU spec? Like we all know X-Men's coming. We all know Fantastic Four is coming. I think a lot, and you probably know this better because I know you just completed the run. It feels like a lot of Avengers stuff has pulled back a little more aggressively than ASM and X-Men even. Like I noticed famous book between the two of us, Avengers #8, First Kang, and maybe this had something to do with the movie and Jonathan Majors in the news. That one seems like it's corrected quite a bit, and almost feels like that one might have overcorrected.
Yeah.
But have you kind of noticed similar things like Spider-Man and X-Men seem to be actually still kind of holding up pretty well versus some of the other properties?
I think that is definitely a fair assessment from as you look at the numbers and you, on an individual basis, it does seem like that is the case. Now, I think it has, to answer your one question, I think it has more to do with the properties themselves, right? Like it's, we always throw around like the blue chip comics and things like that. But if we really want to like be very specific about blue chip, I mean, Spider-Man and X-Men have always been the most popular, especially if we want to put like a generation on it, people who are amongst our age range now, we all grew up on, the Jim Lee X-Men stuff and coupled with the animated cartoon and not to mention everybody always loved Chris Claremont and John Byrne Run and all that stuff. So I think there's just more of a historical demand for those books. And I think that there's probably always going to be at least one person that just wants it now and will overpay for that ASM or X-Men key, which is why it's not going to retrace back to all the other books like an Avengers would, right? Because I think that there's just always going to be someone that's like, yeah, like, maybe this is not the bottom, but like, I just want it. And I feel like those IPs just have that demand. The Avengers stuff is always interesting because there's specific series that all kind of came out in the Silver Age around the same time, like Spider-Man, Fantastic Four, X-Men, Avengers. They all came out 1963, 64. And yeah, Avengers has always been the least valuable one and the probably least in demand one for whatever reason, just popularity. And I think that some of the Avengers keys, I think, have actually overcorrected. And maybe Avengers 8 is in a weird situation because, like I was saying with Moon Knight and Special Marvel Edition, Jonathan Majors got that pre-announcement, so maybe his got overinflated back in 2019 or something.
Yeah, and they got a big boost because of his, everyone loved him in Loki for the 5 minutes.
Yeah,
that he was in it. It was just like, oh my God, never seen anything like this before.
Yeah, it's hard for me to make a true determination of that book because I have my biases because I just transition to Marvel cards. I remember having the Kang the Conqueror Marvel cards, and I just always loved them. So I always kind of dug this character, even though he was kind of random. And it's hard for me to think that when there's going to be a movie called Avengers Kang Dynasty that's going to come out, it's hard for me to not think that the market will, shine on that book once again at some point in the future.
Yeah, and I guess it would kind of make sense that the Avengers stuff probably got, and I'm gonna paint Avengers broadly here. What I'm really trying to say is like MCU stuff, which has mostly been Avengers because X-Men and Spider-Man were kind of locked away, got the most heat over the last, let's just call it like 5 to 10 years. And I still enjoy most of the MCU movies. I don't get caught up in all the internet gets mad at everything stuff. Like, I'm perfectly happy to be entertained for 2 hours. But the general sentiment has been that people are, I don't want to say souring on the MCU, but they're starting to side-eye it a little bit, and maybe some people are starting to sour on it. So I wonder if that too has caused, to what, like your point, like maybe a little bit of an overcorrection on some of this stuff, or maybe, that's what maybe it got overly inflated, like you said, dating all the way back to 2018, 2017 in some cases, depending on the book, and it's kind of getting back to its true level, I guess. Like, it's, how do I want to word this? Like, it's almost getting back to that. I hate to say this statement, getting back to like true comic book collectors, which is, to your point, has always been Spider-Man and X-Men, and the MCU stuff is kind of getting, I don't want to say flushed out, but corrected back to where it always was.
Right. Well, I do think that is definitely the case where when you start to kind of get into the weeds and you really start to think about more of the speculative characters that people like. Shang-Chi's Special Marvel Edition 15 is kind of a good example of a character that, nobody really was into them before the whole Marvel Cinematic Universe thing. So like, what really should the values of this book really be? Who are going to be the holders and the organic collectors of this thing? So there are a lot of those books that probably got inflated from MCU, but then also now, because of the sentiment, have maybe overcorrected. Because, like you said, like I don't get too in the weeds of this whole thing, but how the fans can sour on the movies, but it only takes like two good movies in a row for everyone to all of a sudden get excited again. So things can people have very short memories, I think, with this stuff.
Yeah, 100% agree. 100% agree. And we were talking pre-stream, the sports card market, and it's a little different because sports cards are more, a lot of the focus is more on the ultra modern in sports cards. And I don't know, maybe better, is there more zeitgeist around like the ultra modern comics, or is the focus still primarily on copper, bronze, silver age,
as far as like where
speaking?
where the market is
Like,
looking
yeah,
to
where the
buy.
hype is, where what
Mhm.
it's everyone making videos about, just like the general hype meter or vibes, I guess, whatever term you kind of want to throw out there.
It's interesting because I do feel like we're, and again, I've no real like rhyme or reason to pull this or
Gut
no numbers
feel.
to point to, but just a feeling. It does feel like it's either people now are really getting into the golden age stuff, right? If you're more into vintage stuff, you're really going back, to pre-code horror and that whole thing because of the fact that like the census is so low and you can protect your values and this and that. Or on the flip side, it really does feel like Copper Age and Modern is gets more attention and more hype right now. And we were kind of talking a little bit about this pre-stream, but I've kind of wanted to do more videos about this topic and kind of touch this conversation where, you know, yes, Copper Age books have maybe felt a big correction, or Ultra Moderns have felt a big correction, or whatever. But if you have like a Ultimate Fallout 4 first Miles Morales in a 9.8, like you don't need to worry about sitting on your eBay sale for 2 months to find the right buyer. Like someone's going to buy it that day. ASM 300 is going to sell that day, assuming it's all priced right.
Yeah, priced
So
correctly.
like, so the demand for these books are it's way more liquid. Like you could have a first, like equal value, first Miles Morales versus I don't know, an early, well, Spider-Man's a bad example, but first Black Panther, Silver Age. And I'm willing to bet that if the value is the same, I'm willing to bet that the Miles would sell faster. You'd sooner find a buyer for that. And so that's kind of an interesting thing of like, I don't know if that's a commentary on where the market is, or if it just means that as far as like the demand and who are the people that are looking to still buy this stuff today, that is at least where a lot of the demand still is. You know,
Yeah, that makes sense. I know, like on the sports card side, we're getting, overprinting is like a big hot topic right
yeah,
now. Ultra modern still really correcting pretty hard in a lot of cases. Now, sports, as similar as comics and cards could be in a lot of cases, they could be drastically different as well. Like we literally have, a game can happen that could drastically swing a card price one way or the other because someone wins a championship or switches a team or gets hurt or whatever. You know, comics, it's more MCU spec or movie spec or a show
yeah.
gets announced that usually drives demand. But the ultra modern sports card stuff is still like we're still seeing like, oh, this card went down 20% over the last 3 months. And like I said at the top of the video, I don't know that we're seeing huge drops like that as much on the comic side. Now, how is, because I don't pay any attention to this at all, like the ultra modern stuff, right? Like the little bit that I pick up, it seems like most people aren't super thrilled with like the super ultra mod, like basically present day releases with
Oh yeah,
essentially
yeah,
death by like a billion variant covers. Like, is
yeah.
it really as simple as, oh, we just need to chase like whatever the 1 in 1,000 store exclusive variant cover is, or the 1 in 100, get it to CGC as fast as possible, get the 9.8, make $100 on it, and then churn and burn to the next thing before that one goes to zero? Like, is
One hundred
like
percent.
to really simplify things, is that really what it comes down to right now on ultra modern comic collecting?
I
And
think
I'm
it's
going to use collecting in air quotes there.
yes, yeah. No, I think it definitely is like a game of hot potato, with like the ultra modern stuff. And I should clarify and backtrack a little bit. I do think that like what you're saying with cards, I think the modern, and I haven't built a modern index, but I just maybe anecdotally would say that it does feel like modern has corrected harder because in theory, if there's more supply, like you're saying, like overprinting and stuff, then it's going to be hard for you to not get undercut by someone else trying to sell their book. Right. So
Race to the bottom.
yeah, so I think that there is a lot of correction in the modern. What I was trying to suggest with the liquidity of it is that there's still a lot of people that want to buy it. It's just like in that supply demand equation, where's the floor find itself. But to your variant point, I do think there was a little bit of a stretch in comics that I would say probably 6 months ago and certainly earlier in 2022 where retailer variants and the 1 in 100s and all that game, I've never recommended buying them. I don't think that they're particularly good, investments or whatever. But the demand was there, and people were definitely flipping them, and there was definitely still that chase and that race to it. And I think now it's way harder. I think a lot of retailers were doing really well, doing like ratio retail variance, 1 in 100s, and doing the whole thing, and they're making a lot of money. And I think now they're having a very, very difficult time doing that. But comic collectors love a good gimmick, which maybe sports card collectors do. If
Oh, we
it's
do.
if it's short, if it's shiny and it's foil, like people still like that stuff. So that's still where the kind of variant world is. A lot of foil stuff now. It's like back to the 90s, just bring out the gimmicks, bring out those types of things. And those
Yeah.
are still working, but I mean, it's only a matter of time before, after the initial FOMO, it's like you can find it on eBay for half the price 6 months later.
Yeah, when I got back into comics, when the pandemic first started, like more from like I want to treat this more as like I want to build a collection and also like an asset. I don't want to say asset class isn't. I guess I mean yeah, you're dumping a lot of money into it and you're holding it. So yeah, I guess I'll say
Yeah.
asset class. Um, my rule was nothing past Miles and Gwen. Like that was my cutoff.
Right.
To anything newer than that, I wanted no part of. Like a Miles and Gwen first appearance was like my line in the sand of I don't want to pay $1,000 for something any newer than that. Like that was my dividing line. The only and I will succumb to some FOMO might not be the right word, but I'll get caught up in a good Gwen cover. Like I'm a Gwen collector in Marvel cards, and some of her variant covers are really nice. If something pops up, we're talking like I'm not buying like the 1 in 1,000. Like if a cool Peach cover comes up for $100 in a CGC 98 slab, I'll grab it. But I also know what I'm getting myself into. Like it's probably realistically a $40 book. I'm buying it more for a display piece than I am for an air quotes investment versus a giant size X-Men #1 or something like that. But the modern comic scene, just like I don't know, I can't wrap my mind around it.
I can't really either. It's hard to figure it out. I mean, there's definitely a lot of people that really like it and are into it, and there's nothing wrong with, like you said, like if you just like it, you just like it. It's totally fine to buy something, and not have it need to retain its value. Nobody wants to know that they overpaid for something, but there's nothing wrong with just wanting it now and buying it. But yeah, it's a little bit weird with like the modern stuff and who is into that. And it feels like a lot too with modern. It's hard to figure out which ones are going to kind of stand the test of time. And it almost feels a little bit random. Like a lot of the, I guess you would call them the Grail moderns. You brought up nothing past Miles and Gwen, and I actually think there's kind of an interesting thing about that is because I think Miles' first appearance was 2011 or 12, and then Gwen is 2014, and there is this like window of like modern comics between like 2009 and 2014 that there actually are a lot of like keys that have kind of withstood the test of time because I think that the market was so bad for comics at that time that nobody was buying and nobody was really collecting until Miles and Gwen
MCU stuff's going up,
and then people started to get excited about it once again. So a lot of that stuff has sort of started to become blue chip, so to speak. But this new current stuff that's coming out, say in the last like 3 years or 4 years or whatever, it's really hard to know like what's going to be successful outside of maybe like if something is killing the children. A lot of people think that an indie comic might be the next Walking Dead series, and that might have a future. But modern superhero stuff is definitely a lot harder to figure out.
Yeah, I kind of stole like sports cards. Like we have modern and ultra modern, and there's no real delineation in there. It's kind of like the own thing in my head, and I kind of equate that to comics as well. Like I view like that Gwen Miles age, and I guess who else would be in there? Like probably Kamala Khan's in that range, right?
Yeah,
Ironheart's
Jane
probably
Foster,
in that
Thor,
range.
and
Silk's
Ironheart
in that range.
Yeah,
Jane Foster, like that group of characters. I consider them modern. Like, and then I view like ultra modern, like the last, I guess maybe like from 2019 on or something like that
Yeah.
is kind of how because I feel like you guys, you have silver, bronze, and copper, but then you kind of just like lose your way in the woods, and there's just this big
It's
vast
terrible.
sea of like no
Yeah.
one really knows what to call it. But I agree with you, though. I do think that there is like a pocket in there that kind of needs its own name, like that. For the lack of a better term, we'll call it the Spider-Verse era,
Yeah.
and not just including those characters, but some of the other ones that we just named. Almost feels like it needs to be like its own little 10 to 15 year span there before we get to variant nonsense.
We
And I know that
totally
there's
know
like
that.
I know that there's like a Grail Miles variant cover. I forget which one it's called, but it sells for like $10,000. It's insane. But that was, when did the variant stuff really get wild? Was it after that? Was like that one of the first? I mean, I know they've been around forever, but like when did it like jump the shark?
Yeah, I think it probably, it's hard to know. It's hard to really know. I think it probably jumped the shark probably sometime after that time of like, that era we're talking about, where probably, I'm just going to put a guess, like 2017 or 18 is when things really started to go crazy, because it became like retail variants started to become very, very popular. Where, and again, I'm not an expert on this, but my understanding of it is that, once the retail variant game became a thing, and you start to get a lot of like online retailers too, like, if Neo Cards and Comics wanted to have your own retail variant, I mean, you could commission an artist to do it. I mean, you'd have to fill out some paperwork, but you could commission an artist to do it and go to Marvel, and you could have your own Miles Morales cover and stuff. And there was a big explosion of that. And so there was a lot of, retails variants coming onto the scene, and people trying to do exclusives and all that stuff. And I would say that's probably where it started. The Miles Morales thing that you're talking about, like, yeah, his comic came out in 2011, 2012. And there was like a 1 in 25, which is the one that's like the very, very expensive one. That's the Grail. And then there was like a second print and maybe one variant, but that was kind of it. Like, it was like you kind of knew, like, okay, yeah, here are the ones. And then, yeah, it's really sort of jumped the shark, like you said, and in the recent years. And every retailer can make their own variants, and then secret variants became popular, and then 1 in 100s and all this stuff. And, so yeah, it's so hard to know. I mean, the manufactured scarcity part of it.
It's wild now. I'll pull up like, because I don't really read anything current. I just go back and just reread the same stuff that I was reading when I was a kid. So I don't really follow modern comic books. Every once in a while, I'll dip my toe in the X-Men, like when they did when they went to the island and all that stuff. I forget what that little run was called there.
Stuff, yeah. Apocalypse
so
stuff,
I got into that. I read some of that, but you like I'll see something pop up, because I'm on mailing lists for some of the online retailers, and I'm like, oh, that's a cool cover. And I'll click on it, and then it's like, you go to I think it's like the Go Collect page or whatever, and they lay out like, here's the 75 variant covers for the X-Men Hellfire Gala. And I'm just it's like, insane. What is happening right now? Like this, and sports, to flip it back to my side of the world, sports cards are the same things. They're just paralleling us to death. It's like, they'll make a 101 rookie card, but there's 47 1-of-1s in the same set of the same card. It's just a different shiny coat of paint on it, but they just only make one of them, but it's basically the same card. One's black, one's red, one's got swirly disco balls, one's got fairy dust on it. Like, it's, and it feels like comics, or the ultra modern comic scene, has kind of turned into the same thing. Don't let them figure out how to serial number a comic book.
Oh my God, dude. I mean,
I'm surprised someone hasn't done that yet with because you were saying like the foil, like chromium covers or something like that. I feel like there's a way you can imprint, hey, we're only making 10,000 of these, and here's the individual sequential numbered. I know it doesn't hasn't McFarlane done signings like that before, where he'll actually hand number them on a signing? Like, I'm talking off the line with an imprinted serial number. Marvel or DC or whoever, please God, no, don't do this. I'm waiting for that to happen. Magic cards do it now. Like,
I don't know why they don't do it. I think that I mean, No,
Let's not make ultra modern collecting worse.
yeah, yeah, no slight to Marvel or DC, but frankly, I think that they probably just don't even think to do it. Like, I think they're really behind the eight ball on a lot of their business practices, which it's a good thing that they don't. They probably should be doing it, to min max their profits. But yeah, that's a whole other can of worms.
If they start that idea up in like 6 months, we're suing.
Yeah. Do you think
Someone.
that there's been a push, like in the sports car world? And I'm thinking about this as we're talking about the variant thing with comics. I think that there was like a good sweet spot where with the exclusive variant stuff, like we're talking about that Miles age. Like I think like from a collector side of things, it's like Marvel or whoever or sports cards were like, okay, we're gonna make this chase card or whatever, and that kind of gives value back to the collector because it's like that much more special. Where I feel like now by creating 75 one of ones or whatever, it's like you're pulling that value back into the company because it's like you're printing this idea that this is how the chase works in the collector side of things. And I don't know, it's like this equity exchange where it's like before it was cool because you could rip a pack and have that one of one and you got this like equity, this card that's going to appreciate with demand and stuff, and you get to control that market. And that was cool for the buyers. And now it feels like the companies are saying like, how do we get a piece of that pie back to us? Oh, let's just print more one of ones and things like that.
It's 100% because the overprinting is definitely becoming a real issue, and the parallel flood, they go hand in hand. You can't print more and not also increase the different parallels, because otherwise, if you open a box and it's like, oh, I just got a bunch of base cards, this sucks. I didn't get anything shiny or cool or whatever. So because they want to print more boxes, they need to design more parallels, essentially, because you can't have it they don't want to number them out of 50,000. So instead, we'll just break that up into, 500 different parallels numbered to 400 each, or, just varying. They all have varying depending on the color and the design. Some will be to 5, to 10, to 20, to 100, to 500,
Right.
But yeah, because they want to print more, they have to create more parallels, which kind of waters down the whole thing. And part of my, we've discussed this before, other videos on this. Part of the reason why I like silver, bronze, and copper age comics is because to me they have a higher floor than a lot of sports cards. Now, vintage sports cards is a whole different, bag of cats. So I'm almost kind of comparing apples to oranges because we're talking modern sports cards versus, a giant size 1 or even like an Ultimate Fallout 4. There's just always felt like there was a higher floor there because the first appearance is the first appearance. If I want Deadpool, it's New Mutants 98. That's the example that I always go to because that's the one that there's, the comic guys will be like, that book's overprinted. There's 5,000 of them on the census. And my point always is 5,000 is really not that many. Like in the grand scheme of things, it's really not that many. And if someone wants the first appearance of Deadpool, that's your only option. There's not the base. There's not a silver and unnumbered refractor. There's not the out of 99. There's not the out of 500. And then in cards, you have 6 different companies or 6 different brands. They're all under Panini, but you'll have Prism, Select, Optic, National Treasures, Flawless, like all their subsets. You don't have that in comics. It's just New Mutants 98. Now, in ultra modern comics, as we just discussed, that's a little bit of a different bag of cats now. But if you're going back in time a little bit, there's just, that's it. That's the only one that there is. If you want it, that's the one that you have to buy. Pick your grade that you want it in, essentially, or raw, or whatever. So, I don't know.
And that's always been kind of the nice thing, the clarity. It's like very, very clean and not necessarily easy for anyone to understand. You got to like figure it out. It's there's definitely a learning curve to all these hobbies, but that's always been something that's been, I can never wrap my head around going into sports cards. Be like, oh, okay, Steph Curry's my favorite player. Like, okay, he's got how many different cards that are like keys, So it's hard.
And he's one that actually doesn't have as many as you would see today.
Oh, cool.
because his
Okay.
stuff came out when, to your point earlier about comics being kind of in a dead zone, cards were in a dead zone when his rookie cards came out.
Right.
So he actually has a fairly narrow window. I mean, there's still a decent amount of them, don't get me wrong. But if you looked at like his pool of available rookie cards and compared it to, like a Zion Williamson who came out within the last couple of years is
Yeah.
like the next hyped guy, that it would be astronomical. The number
Right.
of options that you have for Zion versus Steph.
Right.
Especially Steph specifically, because there was like some weird licensing stuff going on back then too, where it was kind of like in between Topps and Panini at the time. But yeah, that era of cards is kind of I think maybe it was just all collectibles. That was right off the 2008 crash. People weren't spending a lot of money on expensive paper or expensive pieces of cardboard back then. So there's like a little window there of not a lot of nonsense going on. But I don't know. Yeah, ultra modern comics, I don't understand. I do feel like I've seen, and you pointed this out earlier, and maybe it's just the content creators that I watch on the comic book side, but it does feel like there has been more of and I think you yourself have kind of dived into like pre-code horror and like that golden age stuff recently. Does it feel like that's just like a flocking to safety, or is it like, hey, I've been doing this for so long, I kind of have everything that I want, I guess this is the next stone to unturned, or a little bit of both?
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I think it's a little bit of both. It does feel like there's something I think in all the collectible hobbies, like the chase and the hunt and like that thrill, something that dopamine hit is something we're all looking for. And I think Golden Age can provide that a little bit for certain people because there's a lot of weird, random comics that have like no meaning, but just kind of comes with a little bit of like Americana history. So it's kind of exciting to like dive into that space and discover those things and like learn about it. And I think that's a lot of what it is. Now, on the flip side, I think it is a lot of just kind of a more of a risk mitigation with Golden Age stuff because if we're really thinking about it, and maybe this is true in the sports card world as well. I mean, like they're very cool covers. The Golden Age is amazing. There's a lot of history to it, but a lot of what makes them cool and valuable is because you can flex on other people because it's like that much more rare, right? Like if Hulk 181 had the same census as a very popular pre-code horror comic, like Hulk 181 would be 15 times more valuable than whatever that pre-code horror comic is, because it's like clearly like the demand for like the character is much, much, much higher. There's more people that have like a emotional attachment to this character than like some of the Golden Age stuff. So there's always that. But again, I think as far as protecting your value, protecting your investment, Golden Age is better because of the supply. But yeah, I think it would be kind of capped to say that people don't get it, or people don't want to get into that because it's just a way for them to be able to flex on other people who don't have it.
No, that makes sense. I mean, I think that's, I think deep down, if we all kind of look at ourselves, any collectible that you purchase is kind of like, a little bit of a flex, even if that's not your personality 100%. Or your style. It's just, I think it's only natural to be like, what's the first thing that we do is like, oh, look at the cool new thing that I got. This content creation is a little weird because it's literally the first thing that we do. We're like, here's a video of the new unboxing, but even in just your personal life, like someone comes over and they're like, oh, that's cool. Like you're in the Marvel stuff because maybe you got like a little Wolverine statue or like a random book laying around, and you're like, oh yeah, I do. Come to the room with like everything in it, and you're kind of flexing on them. Like, look at all this cool shit that I have.
yeah, 100%. Which, by the way, can I just point out the bias of non-collectors? Anytime like someone comes over, like a friend or whatever, and they walk into this room and I just show them they know nothing about comics, like 9 times out of 10. They just go like whatever comic has the highest grade. They're just like, oh, this must be way more expensive than that one. I'm like, man, people are just high grade or low grade shamers. Everyone knows. I'm just like, just because this is a 9.8 doesn't mean it's more valuable than this 2.0. But people only like the high grades.
In most cases, most 9.8s are probably less valuable than a lot of like mid grade, depending on what you're looking at.
Yeah.
There's a lot of nonsense out there in 9.8 slabs.
Yeah, that's a little sidebar, but it's just something that anecdotally I just noticed, which I think is funny.
Yeah, like, oh, this Avengers one and like a three, like
Yeah,
that's
oh god, 3 Gs. That's lame.
it's
Like,
probably pretty junky. You get this nice X-Men 268 first appearance of Gambit in 9.8. That's probably worth 10 times as much, right?
I mean, yeah, how could it not be? It's the number is bigger. But
Yeah.
yeah, the
Um,
flexing thing is an interesting part of the hobby for sure.
yeah, and I feel like once again as content creators, it's almost like I don't want to say it's like a requirement. It's like we're not trying to flex, but just people are just genuinely curious about what we're buying, and I mean, to be frank, it's decent content to make. It's easy content to make of like,
Yeah,
here's the things that I'm buying, or here's the things that I just bought, or whatever. But there is always like and neither one of us really kind of lean into like run out and buy this stuff now. That's not either one of our styles.
yeah,
The great power comes great responsibility line hits home a lot as a content creator of,
totally.
maybe I might think that this is really too cheap for this, but maybe I probably shouldn't say that in a video because as we talked about earlier, we're just two people that just happen to have nicer microphones and decided to upload our voices onto the internet. We're really knowledge-wise, there's plenty of viewers of I'm sure both of our channels that probably know way more than we do and
Yeah,
aren't afraid to
totally.
tell us in the comment section.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, and we I think we're in a place where maybe we have more of an incentive to spend more time like researching and trying to understand. But at the end of the day, like, yeah, we're just two people just like buying what we think is stuff that we like at good prices that we think, and could be totally wrong. Could be totally wrong.
Yeah.
And we'll have video proof to prove it, a year from now, and they're like, Swag said that this was a good book to buy, and now it's worth this.
Yeah, you told me to buy that Avengers 8, and now it's down like 40% since I bought my
Yeah, I
copy.
know. I'm
That
totally.
was
Yeah,
all
I
your
know. I
fault.
know. I owe you money. But hey, let's wait till Avengers Kang Dynasty and let's see what the values are at then. Then we can make
Let's hope
judgments.
we get Avengers Kang
Yeah,
Dynasty,
yeah, that's
depending
true.
on Jonathan Majors
Maybe Kang, yeah,
outside the world
maybe
nonsense.
Kang is done. That'll be my excuse, by the way. Be like, well, I couldn't have predicted, bad PR
Yeah.
for this character.
Um, we'll kind of wrap up on this, and I didn't prep you for this. So, and if this isn't your lane, feel free, but you could probably talk about it at a high level better than I can. A very hot topic button right now in the sports card world is trimming, alteration, cleaning, what you can and can't do to a card, what the grading companies can and can't catch. I'll give you an example. There was a BGS 9 Shohei Ohtani rookie this about a week ago that allegedly it looks like all visual evidence. We're waiting on PSA's decision on it. Someone cracked it out of the BGS slab. They bought it for $2,000, cracked it out of the BGS slab. It had a messed up corner. There's size tolerances to cards. As long as it falls within a range, then it's still good. They usually target cards, they'll get them and then there'll be a little bit of room to still keep it in tolerance. So they trimmed a little bit off the edge to fix the corner. Submitted it to PSA, got a PSA 10, sold for $11,000. It's a serial numbered card. So pros to serial numbers. It's
Right.
a serial numbered card. So when it's sold, you know how it is. I don't know what. Maybe it's the CGC forums. I don't know, but there's something called the blowout forums, and then the various Facebook groups that have the hobby detectives in them, and they very quickly Shohei Ohtani Facebook group, collector Facebook group, very quickly realized like, wait, this is the 12 out of serial number 12 out of 75. This just sold like a month ago in a BGS 9. Now it's in a PSA 10. And they started comparing the two cards and figured out, like, wait, this corner's jacked up on this one, and it's not in this one. It's the same card because of the serial number.
Right.
So this is always, and there was a big interview with someone that basically does card trimming and is like, yeah, I trim them and submit them. Cool. Like, if they don't catch it, whatevs,
Yeah.
But, and I know that there are, the comic, you guys can't go completely wild, but comics, you guys, I feel like, can get away, not so much on the trimming aspect, but more so on the cleaning aspect. And that's, I've run polls where it's like, is card cleaning okay? Like wiping down the surface, or people actually sell kits with spray because cards are, modern cards are chrome based. It's not paper. So you can actually get them a little bit wet and it's fine on the surface.
Right. Right.
So they'll sell like spray, or people will use wax polish to like buff out scratches
Right.
on it. And in the card world, the majority of people are kind of cool with that. But when it comes to trimming or color touch or anything like that, then it's like, oh, no, 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 no. But I feel like on the comic world, as much as you guys have cleaning and that sort of stuff, you guys are, I follow some of the Facebook groups where it's like the comic restore people, and the stuff that they do, like they show the before and like the
Oh,
various stages,
it's
and then it
crazy.
still gets a blue label because they follow like whatever the rules and regulations are to get it past the graders. And I'm like, these guys are freaking wizards. Like, it went from something that was rolled up and that they beat their dog with to, like a CGC 5.0. And I'm just like, what? How did this happen? Like, what is the general vibe slash take around like that level of like, I think everyone kind of agrees that like trimming, removing pieces, cleaning that stuff up is generally bad, and that'll probably usually get caught by CGC. But like, let's kind of start with like the cleaning aspect. Like, are most people are like, cool, okay, it's just accepted, or is like they're this elitist class that's like, you clean your books, I look down upon you, sir?
Well, there's definitely, so this is a really interesting topic. There's definitely a lot to unpack here. And, you know, as I've been able to kind of track it, I think now for sure, the majority of comic book collectors would accept what is generally called like pressing and cleaning, which, we'll table that for a second, but most people today are accepting of it. But there was a time, maybe even 10 years ago, where when pressing was starting to really become popular, where there was a lot of collectors, and you can like go back and look at like the CGC forums from back in the day, where there were a lot of collectors that were like, yo, this is totally like, this is BS. Like, this should not be allowed. Like, how can you give this blue labels and stuff? And so pressing was something that people had to accept over time. I think as people start to understand what it was, but there was a big pushback to it for quite a while. I think most people have the feeling where subtractive stuff is okay, but additive stuff is not. Meaning, you're going to remove dirt, that's fine. You're going to remove wrinkles through pressing, that's fine. You're going to take away things that are trying to bring it back to, in theory, whatever it was once upon a time on the shelf is fine. But if you're adding things, then that's where it goes over the line. So if I'm adding color, if I'm adding tape to like tape a piece that has fallen off, if I'm, replacing a staple, those types of things, I think that's where people don't, don't think that should be okay. Because I think the theory behind this is that we're all just trying to get recreate the simulation that when I buy this comic, this was me buying it off the rack in its most purest form, right? So like erasing a dirt mark is okay because in theory, that you're taking something that has a foreign substance that has since been put on from the time that it was on the rack. I think this is the theory behind all of it. What I think is really interesting now with comics is that there is a new cleaning technique that actually kind of caused a lot of controversy. And I didn't really do any videos about this, but it was interesting, where people have been kind of figuring out this new cover washing technique where I think and again, I'm totally butchering this. I think what they actually do is they actually take apart the comic. They can remove the staples without like destroying them, take the cover off, and you can like wash it in this, I think there's some chemicals in the water, and they wash it, and it really whitens the cover. And for a while,
I've seen before and afters. They are
okay,
wild.
yeah, and people, and there were people that were getting away with this in CGC and getting the blue label. And I think it was very, very recently that this stuff started to get cracked down on. And there was somebody who had done some stuff, and they sent it to CGC, and they got the purple label back, and they're kind of cracking down on this. And this has become kind of like a big, like sort of hot button topic, where I think CGC does say that these kind of bleach washing is a process, right? That's like an additive thing. You're adding chemicals to the cover to make it look better. I suppose if you just put water on it, like maybe that would be okay. But there's two schools now that people are fighting about this within comics, and I don't really know which one's right or wrong. But I think, to relate it back to your setup with the card stuff, it feels like there's always a push and pull, and people are always just trying to decide like what is allowed and what is not. And there's different schools. But I think over time, like the window gets pushed to doing more of these things and allowing them to be okay. Because some people would argue that, I mean, your paper and your cardboard is not going to last forever. At a certain point, maybe replacing a staple isn't all that bad. So I don't know. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but I always found it fascinating that in cards, I remember my Marvel card submission, which, we talked about earlier, that we bonded over the Marvel card stuff. That was the first time I ever sent anything into PSA. And I remember as I was sending cards into PSA, I was just thinking to myself, so is there like a pressing I do for cards? Like, is this like a thing? Like, and I legitimately didn't know, right? Because it's like, I'm not in the card world. And I just think it's funny that, yeah, like none of those techniques have found its way into cards quite yet.
So people, they have found their way and they are just not accepted.
Right.
Because and this is more, and what I am no expert on vintage, but I believe what people will do is, because once again, cards have tolerances for the size. Like not every, like when the grading company gets the card, they measure it and there's a little wiggle room there. So what people would do is they would press the card to make it ever so slightly bigger to give them room to trim it and then try to slip it past. Because if you press it a little bit, the surface area gets a little bit bigger.
Yeah, the pancakes.
And now all of a sudden you have that like micrometer that you could take a razor to the edge and clean up a side if like one particular side or corner is bad. That's why pressing has always been a no-no.
Like, and they can't tell that the thickness has gone down?
Well, and sometimes they can, but I think part of the problem with vintage is that the taller, like you're talking stuff from the 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, the quality standards weren't quite as consistent as they are probably today. So you probably had a little bit more wiggle room on, maybe this particular sheet that came off the line was a little bit thicker. And the people that are experts on this, they know just by feeling the card and seeing it, like, oh, this card is a little out of tolerance. I have some room that I could work with on this, is essentially the way that I understand it. So you'll see this a lot. People will find a Jordan rookie, an 86 Fleer Jordan. And back in the 80s and 90s, you would put your valuable cards in screw downs. I don't know if you've ever seen them. They're like, it looks like a glass block, basically. There's literally screws on the side of it instead of like a mag to secure it. What would happen is these cards would sit in there for 20 years, 100% legitimate. You would send it in to get graded and it would come back that it was pressed, because it was, I mean, literally it was pressed. And no one was doing anything nefarious, but just the art of it sitting inside that glass block, and people would over tighten the screws, would naturally press the card. So people would submit them and then they would get rejected by, the grading companies saying that it's outside, it's too big, it's outside the requirements, or it's too thin, depending on what they would catch. Is trimming a thing in comics, or no, not really?
You will get a purple label if it gets trimmed, and people do trim. Now,
so is there as much of a reason to trim in comics, I guess? Because like cards have centering. I mean, you open 90 Marvel Universe, it's very easy to understand like a centered card versus an off-centered card. Is that I know like wraps will get like slightly askew, but that doesn't affect the grade typically, right? Like if the front cover leans over to the back a little bit, or you see that strip of white, like on X-Men 101, notoriously you'll see that strip of white on the left-hand side because the back, like the cover wasn't like dead on, and you get like see that little bit of back cover on the front, but you'll still see that in a 9.8. I mean, I guess a 9.8 is not a perfect 10, but
well, I would pitch you the positive trimming and then the negative trimming, right? So the negative trimming would be like, you've all seen comics that maybe on the edges and corners, that's when whatever the comic has hit a desk and you start to get these little color breaks and stuff. So the negative thing would be like, well, if I just trim off this little edge right here, you won't see all these little color breaks that have been created on the pages. So That's kind of like the nefarious version.
Mm.
Now, the positive version of trimming is that I think sometimes people have said that sometimes a comic might get like a little tear, right? Like on the page somewhere. And if you trim it, you're going to prevent like this tear from possibly like splitting even further or whatever, because like all of a sudden the surface area is less of this tear. So that would be like in a truest, like I'm going to restore this book in a good way, or I'm going to do conservation, which like conservation is like when you have professional restoration that is like sort of acknowledged as like I'm doing this to ensure that this book doesn't get any more damaged in the future. And it's kind of somewhat accepted with Golden Age and Silver Age stuff.
Well, doesn't conserved actually even get a different label?
It does actually. Yeah. It's a blue label, and then it's got a little gray strip at the top of the blue, and it says conserved. And I actually do think that it's not like a one-to-one blue label price, but I would say that people pay a little bit more than the purple label for it. I don't know why, but
to me, the whole conserved thing just basically feels like I'm a professional comic book alterer versus I'm just a guy in my basement trying to sneak it past CGC to get a higher grade.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. 100%. Yeah. And I think you could always make the argument there's other hobbies and stuff where, if you bought like a vintage car that's restored, nobody
this is the example everyone always runs to is the car thing.
Is that what? Yeah. But nobody.
I wax a car. I don't sell a car dirty. Or if I wreck a car, I don't sell it with a busted fender.
Yeah, that would be like the let me try to frame this in a positive way. Like, so there is that. So I don't know. So trimming does happen in comics. Trimming is all, like, at least for me, I have a hard time knowing if a comic is trimmed. Like the way trimming is always difficult to detect. Like color touch, you open it up the cover, you see little Sharpie marks and things like that. That's easy, but trimming can be tough because I've had comics that look like this was trimmed, and then I got a grade and it wasn't. It just was, the wrap was all weird. So it's hard to tell with them sometimes, but people definitely don't like it.
Yeah. And correct me if I'm wrong, part of the reason that cleaning and pressing kind of became accepted was because the grading companies to a degree had trouble catching it, right? Like it's just difficult for them to tell.
Oh,
like
that's a good question.
That's what I'd always heard. Like if it's not like overly, I mean, sure, you could like overpress a book, but like just generally speaking, if done correctly, it is very difficult to catch. Like even if you wanted to say cleaning and pressing was bad, it would be hard. How do you tell that a book was pressed like with a press versus it just happened to be sitting in maybe a tote with 16 other or 20 other books stacked on top of it?
You're probably I hadn't heard that, but that makes sense to me. You're probably right. Like it's I don't think you could catch it, so and I think too, Matt Nelson, who is like the head grader at CGC, his background is that he actually started
cleaning and pressing, right?
Cleaning, pressing, resto service thing. So I'm sure like through his journey, he was probably integral to the process of CGC accepting it, because, he became one of the head people of CGC. So it just
found out that they can make $20 on it. And
they're like, oh, we could charge for this. This could be a service. Like, oh man, people are going to need to crack open our books and, CPR them, and we can make more money on books that we've already graded. Let's do it.
Yeah. So I've actually interviewed Peter he's the president at SGC, which is probably the second largest grading company right now in sports cards. It was probably like 9 months ago or so. I don't remember when it was. But around the card cleaning thing, because a lot of people were like, they're fine with the idea of taking like a microfiber cloth and like wiping off fingerprints. Like pretty much 99% of the hobby is cool with that. Most people are cool with, I want to apply a little bit of something on there to get off maybe like a gooey spot or help out a little scratch or whatever. But there are some people that are like, no, I don't even, we don't know what this stuff's going to do 20 years from now. Is it going to have an effect on the card? And, I asked Peter directly, I'm like, can you guys like even tell that this has been done in a lot of cases? And he's like, if there's nothing there, if a substance is applied to the surface to clean it, and then it is wiped off and removed completely, how are, as a grader evaluating a card, how are we ever supposed to know that it was there if it's just not there anymore? Like, there's no signs of it. How
Right.
are we supposed, like, unless you're going to go CSI and do like a chemical analysis on the front of every card, there'd be no way to ever catch it. Kind of like the same thing with the cleaning and pressing on the comics. It's like it almost becomes acceptable because there's just no way for us to detect this reasonably anyway.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you're right. It's like you almost kind of have to accept it as, if a grading company is going to be intellectually honest or whatever, we just have, you kind of almost have to just allow it to happen, because otherwise it's just going to come back to bite you if someone later says like, oh, this had this thing on it or whatever. And, so you just get in front of it and accept that some of these things are going to be allowable in the hobby
Yeah.
soon.
The interesting angle that you guys don't have in the comics goes back to the serial number thing. Once again, comic companies, don't steal this. That's the last thing that we really want. But in cards, it's funny because you'll see the card pop up in like the Otani example from earlier. You will see it pop up in one grade with one company with like a surface mark on it, and it's a serial numbered card. And then like 6 months later, you'll see it pop up in a different company's slab at a higher grade, and magically that scuff that was on the front is gone. But it's
Yeah.
it's the exact same card because of the
Yeah.
serial number.
Well,
So
yeah. So there have been not many, because again, it's not the number thing, but there was a very famous thing that happened with like a Golden Age comic where very, very big grail, there's only like 30 copies on the census or whatever. Right.
so everyone knows everyone. If you're into that book, you probably know what all 30 look like.
Yeah,
To a
and
degree.
it's like, okay, this one is missing a corner with a very specific cut. So it's like you kind of know, right? And so there was one instance where this grail called Suspense 3, like it was up for sale, it was going on to Heritage Auction as a blue
Was this
label,
recently? I
whatever.
feel like I remember hearing about this from
Yeah,
Automatic.
yeah, it was an automatic store. Yeah, yeah, somewhat recently. So it was going on a Heritage Auction as a blue label, low grade or whatever. And then someone had noticed that this cover had the same damage as a previously qualified version of this comic. And so, that was like missing the centerfold. And so Heritage took it down, became a whole thing. And basically what it was is that somebody took the qualified one, cracked it out, did like resto, I think married a centerfold, which means they found a centerfold from another comic and put it into this one, and then sent it back to CGC, got the blue label. So there were shenanigans, and they got it past CGC, and they were able to catch it. So a similar kind of Otani shenanigan situation going on.
Given that the nature of comic books, because it is harder to catch this stuff, you don't have serial numbered stuff, and most of the time, unless it's like a super rare golden age book, and there's no way to know this for sure, but just like your general thought, like, do you think that that sort of stuff goes on more than anyone probably really wants to like realize or admit? Like, oh, cool, I'm at a show and here's I don't know, an X-Men 1 that's missing the centerfold page in a, what would that be, a CGC 0.5 or a 1.5 or something automatically?
Yeah, probably a 0.5, yeah, automatically. Yeah.
So cool, here's this. I could get this for a steal of a deal, and I have another busted up copy of X-Men 1 at home that has a clean centerfold, or it was missing the cover, whatever. I could pull the centerfold out of this because the rest of the comic looks like a 5.0.
Right.
Slide this in there and send it off to CGC and see if we can sneak it past. And oh, look at that, my 0.5 X-Men 1 that was missing a centerfold all of a sudden is a CGC 4.5, and I just added, I don't know what, 20K of value on in that swing. I don't know the X-Men 1 pricing off the top of my head, but I don't know, a 3.5, what a 3.0 probably goes for, what, 10K,
probably like 15 to 20, right? Yeah, you went from like 5,000
even if I got a
to
2,
15,
even if I got a 2,
yeah,
you would
yeah,
still probably
you gained a
triple your
couple
money.
G's. Yeah. So
do you think
I
that happens more? Like, I'm sure there's probably like a cabal of comic doctors that this is all that they do.
I think that this probably happens so much. I mean, not so much, right? Like, it's not like there's factories of it, but like, yeah, like there's like if there's
money to be
equity
made,
to be gained and there's money to be made, like someone is doing it, or some people are definitely doing it. And yeah, sometimes it gets gets by CGC. You know, they miss it. Like they flip through the comic and they don't notice it's not the same centerfold or whatever, you know? So it's like, there's probably a lot. There's probably a lot of like, you know, there's
Especially
probably
the
a lot of
Silver
like,
Age and Golden Age.
yeah. Or like, who knows? Like maybe there's a bunch of it would be a surprise. There's an AF-15 that's like a 9.0 and it's missing the centerfold. And they just like, when they graded it, they just didn't see, you know, like there's probably those things, which is pretty wild. But I imagine there's probably a lot of shenanigans and doctoring and stuff. And that would be kind of a cool, like, you know, if we were investigative journalists, YouTubers. I mean, I imagine like the stories that you could.
Oh, I can only, because it's been a thing in the card industry forever. Like there's just like this, and I even did a video the other day because the trimming, card cleaning, altering doctor topic seems to pop up about every 6 months to a year. It like comes in the zeitgeist, everyone talks about it, and then we just kind of all forget about it again. And the topic and thumbnail of the video was, do we really want to know? Like, we say that we do, but
no,
do we really want to know? And that was one of the larger sports card podcasts had Evan Mathis, who's a former NFL player on, and I referenced this earlier. He is someone that actively trims cards. He got into the sports card space, and he trims cards, and you know, he says that he doesn't submit them in the grading, or he's been whatever. I don't want to get in the weeds on that, but regardless, it was, you know, he was basically kind of like, "Are you sure you guys really want to know exactly how much of this stuff has been going on for?" And not even just since the modern, you know, the COVID boom. Like we're talking decades that people have been, and especially once again on the older stuff, it's a little bit easier of, I could clean this up a little bit and, you know, add, you know, double, triple, quadruple the value depending on what it is. And in comics with the no serial number thing, it would be, I feel like it would almost, it's like vintage cards. There's no way to tell that, you know, one card changed hands from, and with us, it's even easier because we have multiple grading companies. So you could kind of spin the wheel.
Oh,
you'd be like, oh, well, Beckett gave it this. Let me see what PSA is going to give it. Oh, I don't like that grade. I'll crack it out and send it to SGC. Oh, I don't like what they gave it. Let me send it to CGC/CSG and see how they grade it. Get their opinion on it. Or one catches it as altered. I'll send it to the other one and see if they catch it. You know, in comics, it's really just kind of CGC and CBCS or bust. Really just CGC, but you know, you guys can't spin the wheel as much as we can.
Yeah, I think I mean, the answer to the question is probably not, right? Like, do I really want to know, like, if my Avengers is like got a coupon cut out or something?
Entombed it and slapped that number on it. Do you really want to know that someone swapped the centerfold, or they added the centerfold on, or the staple wasn't original, or you know, especially that stuff? Because I'm not a comic book grader. I've never have been. I always buy my books already slabbed. I don't know, how hard is it to tell that a centerfold got swapped or that a missing page was replaced? Is that easy to tell? Or is it like, in my mind, it would be impossible? I'd be like, I have no idea how you would tell this.
I'd like to think that maybe it's easy to tell. I mean, we've all flipped through a comic, you know how it gets a little oxidated and it's like, you know, the yellowish on the page, all of a sudden there's contrast there. So, but maybe not. Maybe it's not easy to tell, you know, and who knows? I have to imagine that it gets past people, you know.
Yeah.
Everyone's human. Graders are human, you know.
Yeah. You're paying for an opinion. That's what we say in the sports card world. You're paying for an opinion. And I have to imagine, you know, to go back to the X-Men 1 example, I think that's a good example. You know, if the people that are probably doing this, because it is large, especially now, post-COVID, it is large sums of money differences. I am sure that they have elaborate operations. And when I say operations, I just mean like they probably have multiple busted up copies of X-Men, or they probably know a way that, hey, if I put it in this humidor or this other contraption for so many days, I could start to get closer to the color of this book that I bought in a 0.5 to make it more likely that it sneaks through. I just see what they can legally do when it comes to cleaning. I can imagine the tricks that they have up their sleeve.
Totally. And you would think that, I mean, there's a reason that there is a market for, you know, selling page 2 of X-Men 1. You would think like, who wants to buy like a single page of X-Men 1? It's like, well, this market probably. I mean, maybe there's the random person that's got a weird thing for, collecting just single pages, but I think people sell the pages because they know somebody wants that page for some reason. So
Yeah, as long as people are willing to spend astronomical sums of money for higher numbers in the corner of a plastic case,
yeah,
then I feel like there's always going to be an element of that.
there's definitely value for the materials that can help them improve, those numbers.
Yeah, for sure.
Or
All
get
right,
the
we'll wrap
blue.
up on that. I wasn't expecting to go that long on that topic, but I think it's an interesting discussion point, especially when you're crossing the streams on kind of what's acceptable in one field versus another. Is always
Yeah.
an interesting talking point. So, if you are not subscribed to Swaggle House, what is it? It's comics, games, and comics and games. I always forget.
Comics and games, but I don't really
It's
talk about
comics.
games.
Yeah.
Yeah. At this point.
Go check him out on YouTube. He posts probably 3 to 4 videos a week, unless something spicy happens.
Yeah, I think 3 is a good number if I can get 3. 4 would be nice. 5 if it's really hitting all cylinders.
You want to catch that algorithm when CGC raises prices or does something wild, or
oh man, it's going to be a good video if CGC does something bad.
Anytime a grading company, I always joke with our mutual friend Reggie collects. Anytime a grading company or a hobby related company does something stupid, the only people that win are the content creators.
Oh yeah, 100%.
So if you're not subscribed to Swags, go check him out. Really great comic book content. Especially, I feel like most people that kind of enjoy my charts and graphs content would enjoy your take as well, because I feel like we have similar styles of, we don't just kind of throw stuff out there. We usually do at least fake like we're doing research about it by throwing a chart on the screen.
Totally. Well, yeah, no, I appreciate you, having me on as always. And yeah, it was always a good talk, and look forward to doing it again.
All right, Swags, we'll catch you later. Thanks.